So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar. We're talking about AI and auto-classification for structured data management and disposition. If we have not met, my name is Jen Nelson. I'm the VP of Strategic Solutions at Valora, and joining me is Sandy Surkes, who is our co-founder and CEO at Valora. And thank you for joining us. We are here in our annual webinar series. We like to touch on topics that are kind of top of mind that folks are talking about in industry. So today we're talking about auto classification and AI for structured data management and disposition. We have a few more that we're going to add to this roster over the summer, actually, talking about some of the concepts that we're talking about here, specifically around AI and also data hostage, which we'll talk about in a bit. But if you haven't registered, please hit up the website to register for any future webinars, and you can always see all of these are on demand on our website as well. And speaking of webinars and events, I will also plug that if you happen to be in Phoenix next week for ARMA Info Next, Sandy and I will be there. Sandy is speaking and presenting at the executive session, and I think on Tuesday and Wednesday sessions as well. So we would love to meet up with you and love to see you in person. If you happen to be there, just hit us up and we'll find you. A little bit about Valora before we get started. If you are new to Valora, we offer an auto classification platform used by information governance teams, records managers, compliance, legal teams, IT teams to help automate the discovery, the classification, identification, defensible disposition of content, regardless of where it lives across the enterprise. So it's a great tool for bringing not only multiple enterprise repositories into a single view, but also to align multiple information governance use cases, which we'll be talking about later today with our structured stuff. So that's a little bit about us, a little bit about you, because we always ask you what your interests are when you register. Lots of IG and IM folks around the table. So welcome, some from compliance and data privacy and security. So welcome. And we always ask you, what are your main challenges this year in your roles in information governance? And OMG, everything is always the winner there. So we will be touching on just about everything in here, specifically around structured data. So we'll be, I encourage you to ask questions as we go. We've got a Q&A open. We've got the chat open. So please ask your questions as we go. And Sandy and I will kind of hand things back and forth, and we have no problem interrupting each other. So please do ask your questions. If you're not comfortable doing that, that is okay. We can wait to the end as well. We'll have a few minutes after this wraps to answer questions. But so that you know, a recording of this will be sent tomorrow morning for you, as well as a copy of the slides. And of course, any feedback that you have about sessions you'd like to see or anything that we cover here, please reach out and let us know. Okay, so we got a heck of an agenda today. Everything you ever wanted to know about structured data and disposition. We're talking all about structured. We'll talk unstructured. We can't not talk unstructured. But what we're going to talk about today specifically is the responsibilities and challenges of managing structured data systems, especially when they're siloed, and we're talking about structured, unstructured, semi-structured, and the different kinds of structured data that we find and we come across in our roles. What are AI and auto classification and their roles in data analysis? We will touch on that as well. Transforming structured data, and we will introduce you to mockuments if that concept is new to you. We have fun with that. And then also how AI and auto classification can help teams improve efficiency, compliance. And then we will also take a bit of a tour into one of our clients' use cases on how they're using structured data and mockuments for very specific data requests across multiple structured repositories. So we'll show you how they do that and how they handle that. So Sandy, let me pass that over to you.
Sure. So when we first started kind of presenting on structured data, which I'm guessing at this point was maybe about 3 years ago, I did a little bit of research just to see, how much enterprise data really is in structured databases and structured systems. And I was shocked how much it was, and that it was actually the lion's share of data. At that time, what we were always hearing from people was like, oh my God, my unstructured, my file shares, blah, blah, blah. And now we still hear that, rest assured. But it's not the only crisis now. And I think organizations really are starting to look at their structured data because, as time passes and people move through their careers and into other jobs and things, a lot of that institutional knowledge is kind of departing. And so people are really kind of unsure what's in their structured data and what are they responsible for and how do they even manage this? Because one thing that we found, in addition to being the lion's share of the expense, is that structured data is this sort of like dumping ground. Things go and they never leave. It's sort of like the problem with legal hold. Like legal hold never gets lifted. Structured data never gets cleaned up. And so we're hearing more and more this kind of cry for help around how do we retention manage structured data. And so that takes us perfect, Jen, into kind of how did we get here? Why is this so hard? What's going on? So the first thing is that structured data tends to be isolated in its own universe, and they kind of grew up independent of each other. So you might have a CRM system over here and employee HRM system over there and some other, financial transactions thing over here, and they're completely independent of each other. And just trying to get them to talk to one another is difficult, let alone use kind of a common taxonomy or a common language. It just doesn't exist. So if you need to retrieve data across systems, you have to be fluent in all of them, not to mention having access and, reliable access into all of them. That is proving very tricky. Structured systems, just by their very nature, are quite efficient. They store data as, database information. That's an efficient technique. And because of that, because of the efficiency, you wind up with tons of it. If your organization has, at any given moment, 300,000 customers and you have 20 years of data, and you have a certain amount of churn in your customer base, the volume and complexity of the data is just overwhelming. And traditional governance methods, and we're going to talk about this later, this difference between what we call observational governance and operational governance. Just kind of put that one in your pocket. But basically, we are overwhelmed with the traditional techniques, with the sheer volume of data. The context is typically, if you've been asked to suddenly, plop into some structured system that you don't use on a day-to-day basis and try and figure out what's going on in there, that can prove extremely tricky if you don't have that context, or if it's changing over time, which it generally is. What we've heard from clients is that it's quite the challenge to respond to, let's say, a DSAR or some other request in a timely fashion because of this lack of information, this lack of access, the totally separate universes. And they have trouble meeting the short time windows required for these things. And then finally, this notion of data hostaging. That's a word we're trying to kind of get into all of your vernacular, which is when, third parties or SaaS hosted systems, whether unstructured or structured, but quite frequently in the structured universe, are hosting your own data and yet charging you for the privilege of hosting it, charging you to retrieve it or to analyze it, and charging you to retention manage it. That is what we call data hostaging. It's kind of a modern day digital version of what, who they are, storing your own paper data used to do. And so we are actually doing a whole webinar on this topic on data hostaging over the summer. So that's one of the new ones we're adding to the roster that Jen showed you in the beginning. All right, so that takes us forward to, so what does AI have to do with all this and auto-classification? So the first thing to understand is that AI and auto-classification are kind of inextricably linked. Historically, auto-classification is used an older version of AI called machine learning. I know many of you are familiar with that. We're going to get into kinds of AI in a moment. But basically, auto-classification is a type of AI. And it is what it's doing is analyzing the content of all the files or analyzing the content of these structured data systems to get information, to synthesize, to kind of pull things together, to be able to create this single pane of glass, this one view on all these disparate systems. And then AI is kind of providing back information about those files in the form of metadata or reporting or synthesis, depending on what your objectives are. But in Valora's case, almost always, comprehensive metadata that then gets used for other things. All right, so Jen, take us ahead one. All right, so at this point, I hope most of you know what AI is, but we don't ever want to assume, and we don't know. There might be people in the audience who are like, I don't. We're not going to ask you to out yourselves. But basically, so if you don't know, AI is essentially a form of analysis that is analyzing tons of data. That's why they call it a large language model. It's looking at large volumes of data that already exist, that at least initially were created by humans and therefore, question mark, are valid. And kind of analyzing that data and then creating sort of statistical likeliness of how things are related and therefore what the next thing kind of in the pattern should be. That's essentially how it works in a layman's view. And there are, at this point in time, kind of 4 techniques for AI. There are more emerging all the time. If you are going to be at InfoNext, I will be talking about some of those. But for today, we'll keep it simple. Machine learning, as I said, is the kind of older style. What machine learning is doing is, if you're familiar with Bayesian or probabilistic systems, it's basically looking at prior work and creating a statistically relevant or statistically likely next step. And what's nice about machine learning and also extractive AI is that the system responds to rules that software engineers put in place. Extractive AI, just to give you the set, what that is essentially specifically targeting data for retrieval from systems that already exist. So think about like a form. It's specifically pulling out, the date of birth off the form. That's extractive AI. Valora uses both of these quite extensively. So those 2 at the top are highly defensible because they are rules-based. That's how the technology works. The rules get written down, the software follows the rules and kind of shows its work. Like you used to have to show your work in calculus. How did you derive this, answer? So those 2 techniques are utilizing rules and showing their work. So they're highly, highly defensible. They're 100% repeatable. And they are good, solid methods if you need to prove how you got your answer, why you're doing what you're doing. And we hear a lot of that in information governance and legal. You do need to defend your work output. So that's why Valora tends to live in the orange box. However, newer AI techniques, which presumably you're all familiar with at this point, generative AI, that's your Chat GPT, your Claude, your Gemini. They are essentially creating responses by, again, using that statistical likelihood and saying, this is probably the next thing that comes in the pattern. The difference is they are generating an answer. The answer didn't exist prior. They're kind of surmising and guessing and generating a response for you, which is why sometimes it's wrong. We'll get into that in a second. And it's also where hallucinations come from, because it's making it up with a sort of statistical likelihood, but it could be wrong. Agentic AI, that's the hot thing right now. If you're not familiar, the word is, the hint is in the word, agent. In other words, the AI is acting as a kind of an independent agent. It has agency. So the AI is doing things like taking the next step, taking actions. So you might be interacting with AI and investigating where you want to take a vacation or a holiday, and it says, shall I go ahead and order those tickets for you? Shall I go ahead and book dinner reservations? Whatever. That's agentic AI. It can be permission based like that, or it can be automatically happening in the background. And that's where this sort of explosion in compute power is required, because if you set your guardrails correctly, the agentic AI is now interacting with itself. And one AI saying, should I do this? The other AI saying, yes, you should. And they're like, okay, I'll do that. Well, I'll do this. I'll do this. And so the kind of agency is running and creating all kinds of transactions and activities. Again, you can see why these two are a little less defensible in the sort of traditional record/legal sense. That doesn't stop their adoption and their rapid advancement. So we will be covering all of these in our discussion. But for clarity, Valora tends to operate our own technology in the upper half. Okay. Oh, we're down here. Okay. So I did mention, this is important for you to know if you're not familiar with generative AI, is that it has some limitations. I know it can feel like magic when you're talking to it, and it anticipates your next move and whatever. It is designed for that. However, it only knows what it's been trained on. If you're using the publicly available versions of Claude, ChatGPT, whatever, they have been trained on data sets. I think I just queried ChatGPT the other day, and I think it was last trained in November of 2025. So, for example, if you ask it about the Artemis mission around the moon, it says, yes, that's coming sometime soon now, instead of, yeah, they're up there right this very second. And so it's out of date, and it doesn't know anything kind of current. Now, you can pay for models that are more up to date, and you can train models. That's where agentic, or if you've heard the term RAG, retrieval augmented generation, that's where those come into play. The other big thing you've surely heard about this is, of course, hallucinations. And the hallucinations come from that generative aspect. If you show for a training set, every time you say the word happy, it's followed by the word birthday, except this time it's your anniversary and not your birthday, it's going to say happy birthday. It's going to hallucinate that it's your birthday when it was really your anniversary, because it's never seen anniversary before, or it's not as likely. And so one of the problems that can happen, so pay attention, is it reflects back what it's been trained on. So that includes things like bias, popularity. So if you have, we'll put this in a real IG context now, if let's say 50% of your data is duplicative, it's rot because it's redundant, it's dupes, the generative AI is going to think, it doesn't understand that a dupe is sort of junk. It doesn't have a notion of the value of that. So it just thinks it's more common. And so what do you think it's going to give as the response? It's going to give the rot response, because it's the most common thing, as opposed to perhaps the one instance that's the most recent answer or the best answer. We're going to come back to this theory later about relevance versus best, right? The most relevant, color top that I'm wearing is navy blue. Whether you think navy is my best color or not is a very different discussion. And yes, please tell me in the comments if you think there's a better color. I want to know. But that's just a very simplistic example of the difference between relevance, highly relevant navy, I'm literally wearing it, versus best. Okay, Jen.
Okay, so don't mean to scare you, but there are absolutely benefits of AI-driven approaches. And as you can see, when we ask robots and AI and agents to do things for us, because it's operating specifically in an auto classification sense on a rules engine. The improved accuracy by taking those decisions away from humans is exponential. There's no if or. I called it blue, Sandy called it navy blue. That goes away. So minimizing human error is a huge benefit. Of course, it saves time. Thinking about how I would classify and Sandy would classify saves time for that. Security, because it's automatically detecting sensitive data, not only I'll say traditional PII from a data privacy sense, but also corporate sensitive data, IP, and other things that that you wouldn't want shared or exposed. And then, of course, the fourth being scalability. As many engines as you want to throw at data, you can scale that that processing exponentially. And the comment, we don't hear it as much anymore. Well, I shouldn't say that. I was going to say we don't hear it as much anymore, but AI is going to replace my jobs. No, they won't. No, it just won't. I guess it depends on what role you are doing and what role you are playing. But in the context, certainly of information governance and the role that IG is now playing of course, in the AI-driven approach and the strategy that organizations are implementing, it's only enhancing what teams can do, what businesses can do, and how they can apply AI to their data. So let's talk for a second about certainly about auto classification and how it works. When we say when we say true auto classification, it means we're taking the human out of the loop. I shouldn't say that. We're going to keep a human in the loop, but we're not relying on humans to make decisions about the data for us. We're going to rely on the technology and its rules and its capability for that machine learning to perform the automated analysis of what we're asking it to do. So in the context of classifying data, what is this file? What do I do with it? And then the ability to do it. So the first thing it's going to do is search or read files to pull out those file attributes, and that's going to become the rich metadata that we tag things with. So usually we see something system generated like last access date or file name or file path, which doesn't tell us anything about what's in it. So what an auto classification technology does is open that document and read it and start to pull out those information nuggets. So rather than last access date, which tells me nothing, if this is a contract, I don't care about a last access date. I care about the signature date or the effective date or the renewal date. So it's going to start to pull that rich metadata out of there. And as it does, it will then layer on those recognition algorithms to say, oh, this is an employment contract. Got it. Not just a contract. And then it will differentiate those different document types against your records retention schedule so that you can then now apply proper disposition handling to that. So if it is an employment contract, say, mark it as confidential, move it to SharePoint, keep it where it is, and retain it for 8 years after termination of said employee, which is a date that hasn't even happened yet because they're still employed. And before that happens, get HR to approve it before we delete it. So you can put multiple steps and multiple disposition and handling techniques on a file, and it can be anything from strictly automated, highly automated, to manual, and then everything in between, maybe depending on where it is or who the custodian is or the department or the information repository, whatever that is. We can tag it, delete it, move it, redact it, hold it, migrate it, anonymize it, whatever you need to do with your data. That's an important step, and we'll talk about that operational governance in a moment. But it's important not just to show us what's happening and where things are, and then actually to help remediate it as well. So an example of auto-classifying documents, this is something that you would see in your file share. LGPIF final.pdf doesn't really tell me anything as a user. So what it's going to do is open up that document and it's going to read it and start to pull out those info nuggets. So what is this doc type? What is it about? Who are the people involved? What roles do they play? What dates are there? What is a trigger date, of course? And then the system is going to tell us, this is a consent form. It is part of a clinical trial. Our retention based on the records retention schedule for this business is the executed date plus 8 years. So it's going to pull out that executed date. and what happens when, when it's up for destruction. Keep it until then, and Bob's your uncle. It'll do that by itself. Now, you can imagine that once you know what everything is, the part of that DNA sequencing of every file allows you now to apply different IG use cases to your data so that you can confidently execute now that you know what it is, where it is, who has access, how it should be handled, how it should be treated, where it should be stored. So the top use cases that we see once we know that are certainly data discovery and classification, to understand what it is, rot and file cleanup, to pull out the stuff that has no business value anymore so we can stop accessing it, so we can stop storing it, so we can stop feeding it to AI engines. The third, records management, obviously, because we're finding those info nuggets, we're comparing it to records retention schedules, and then managing that content through its life cycle. Data privacy and GRC, you can imagine as we're looking and we're pulling out those data nuggets, we're flagging and identifying content that contains personally identifiable information, other sensitive information, other corporate sensitive and other compliance related information. So that's, I would say, the fourth biggest one. Legal hold and e-discovery is another use case that we see clients using for the data collection part, and then also the holding under legal hold as something that you can do as well. Of course, once you know where everything is, that makes it easy. And then AI readiness. And this is to what Sandy was chatting with before. Reducing that risk in understanding what you are feeding your AI agents, what they're crawling, what they're using as kind of their source of truth for training on your enterprise data, being confident that it is the right data that should be fed to those engines, and it's appropriate that that can be shared with those systems. So that's some use cases about how other clients are using this for structured and unstructured. But let's talk about structured. So we looked at an example of going through an unstructured file, but let's look at structured data. So structured data could be anything that's structured or semi-structured. So we are talking databases, data lakes, tables, CSVs, Excels, and then semi-structured going into JSON and XMLs. And the challenge here is there's just so much of it. And it's not in an easy way for humans to now interact with. So when we're thinking about a database, each record is fielded data. And how do you process and account for that structured data while accounting for the unstructured data as well, and applying the right retention rules and everything that we need to those systems? So one of the steps that we take when we are looking at structured data to create and transform these giant structured databases into something that IG teams, human teams, can interact with and understand and visualize. And we do that by visualizing those types of structured data with mockuments. And mockuments is just the way it sounds. It is a mock document, and it is a solution that we came up with to make the analysis of structured data more interpretable for humans. It makes it accessible so that you can see things, you can draw from things, you can make decisions. And it's an easy way, and we'll see this in an example with our client, is easy way to search and respond to data requests. And we'll get into that a little bit, because it is it's a nice ability to be able to provide the data requested and not the source, like the entire database. So we'll get into that. But how we visualize that structured data, we can either export and process in place from a database or a data lake, and it will export. We can either do a direct connect, or if you would rather see it in CSV and XML, JSON, or whatever, export that, and then each record or each row and its associated fielded data becomes a mockument. So it creates that user-friendly view of that fielded data, that record data, in a way that we can now interact with. And when we create these mockuments, there's three main ways that our customers are using mockuments. The first is, and we'll go through all three of these, the first is a placeholder as a data aggregation point for searches across multiple structured repositories, and then a way to integrate physical records as well, so that we can, we're looking at this holistic view of all of our data silos, not just our digital. So first, let's talk about mockuments as a placeholder. This is kind of an easy one. It's neat to be able to see it and to be able to create it, because this is a good, if you're looking for, maybe that you got monthly reports or balance sheets or receipts, and you can see everything, but you're missing one. I've asked Dave, I've asked Sarah, I've asked accounting. Nobody can find June. So we can create a mockument as a placeholder to say, well, this is June's balance sheet. Nobody can find it. And this is a great way to account for missing information in our data stores that we all kind of know is missing, but keep that as a placeholder so we don't keep asking ourselves every quarter, what happened to June 2023? So that's the first example of a placeholder. Moving into more structured data with the mockuments, this is for search and data aggregation. This is a great way to be able to take that structured data, what the information that we're pulling from structured data, and be able to visualize it in a cohesive way. So in this example, this is the first 20 lines of a 100,000 line database extraction from Workday. So we've got employee names, their managers, the dates they reported to those specific managers. And in the event of a DSAR request, a data subject access request, or a legal hold, in this example, we're looking for Sally Smith. When she worked for us, who she reported to, and the reporting structure since she was hired. So this is a way to pull out Sally Smith, who's been with the company since 1985. So she's reported to certain people and moved to certain cities and moved to certain locations, reported to different managers, but in a way that we can find Sally Smith through this or through the structured database in Workday, we can extract all Sally Smith and create a mockument. So consolidate all of Sally Smith's entries and allow us to either produce or lock down that data, not just at the document or the entire database. We can lock down the data, not the source. So with this mockument idea, we can apply retention to original document, we can apply it to the source, we can apply it to the data, and then that disposition handling, we can also then apply to different places, to the mockument, to the source, and rather than the entire database.
Jen, just to add,
Yeah.
in cases like a DSAR, very often there's a requirement to produce to Sally. Perhaps the request was, I want to know everything that you have on me. So obviously you can't produce for her the 100,000 line report that includes every other employee. It has to be only her information. So this becomes kind of like a clever distillation, or even sort of a form of redaction. You can think about it as, we've pulled only the Sally data. That's one way to think about it. The other way you can think about it is, we've removed all the non-Sally data. So
Yep.
Depending on what your use case and what your kind of production requirements are, this becomes incredibly valuable, because you can produce that to Sally or the regulator, wherever this is going, in like 2 seconds, instead of having to first yank it all out, redact everybody else, produce a report that's just Sally, double check that you got everything. And This is just like quick, it's done. And in some cases where this is happening on a kind of frequent basis, what you do is, instead of doing it on demand, go get me Sally Smith, is you do it in advance. You do it for each employee or each customer, each product name, whatever it is, so that you have instantaneous ability to produce. And I think we just saw a question come in. It says, I don't know if you can see questions, Jen, but I can. It says, Are mockuments actual files that take up space, or are they virtual, only generated on demand, I assume? Okay, so let's start with the second, since I just mentioned that. Typically, yes, they're only generated on demand, but there are circumstances where you want to pre-generate them so that they're at the ready, or possibly being auto-distributed ahead of something. So you can have that, you can play that either way, and it can be very much contextually driven. In terms of, are they actual files? They're not files in the true sense. They're not going to live out in the universe. They live within the Valora ecosystem. If for some reason you want them out in the universe, they can be placed there and they can become real. There are some circumstances where you want that, but mostly they are virtual. They are, as you can see in this case, they are meant to kind of simulate or emulate the manner in which they were used. You legal eagles will recognize that phrase, the manner in which they were kept, because that's very important for productions in a litigation matter. So this does qualify. We've had that, kind of blessed by, clients outside legal counsel. It's basically a form of redaction and contraction. That's all it is. So it counts. But they are virtual. And the take up space, I mean, yes, what we are generating in our system in Valora, what kind of lives in the Valora environment is metadata, text, and a preview image. So we do make a preview image. It looks like this. So those do require some bits and bytes of storage. So there is some space utilization just by nature, but not a traditional file as you would typically think about it.
Mm-hmm.
Great question.
And our third use case for mockuments, we're veering away here from structured, but because we're talking about mockuments, the third use case is integrating physical records. So if you think of your physical record storage provider, oh, we do have a name in here. We can see what we normally see is source location, box location, custodian, when it was checked in, whatever, we've got our RFID. So what we can do is take that and inherit that data from your physical storage provider and create a mockument. So now you can see what's in the box and account for it. And I'll use my friend Taylor Swift here as an example. She's in the box. We've got her resume in the box. And what this allows us to do when integrating our physical is pull in the digital and the physical. So in this example, if I'm looking for my friend Taylor Swift and all of her employment information, I can see her employment agreement. I can see a copy, the original employment agreement, and I can also see that she's in. So it's a neat kind of way to be able to visualize that and bring those physical records now into your purview. I don't like to use that word, into your vision, into your world, so that you can account for it and manage it at the same time. In the same place, kind of with the same tool sets, and applying the proper management and retention across whether it's digital, unstructured, structured databases, or physical records sitting in your storage. And what that allows you to do at the enterprise level, because you've got not only the different formats, the different types, the silos of data, the ability to see and peer into all of these different formats to discover and understand what it is, to apply that analysis and be able to auto-classify the same rules, the same auto-classification across these different repositories. And more importantly, the ability to apply the defensible disposition back to those repositories as well. And then always look for new and edited data. Once we add things, we take things away, things are changed. Always you get to this near real-time view of your entire data estate. Doesn't matter if you are in unstructured, if you're in email, if you're in Oracle, or if your stuff's in Iron Mountain. And this is the difference between this observational versus operational governance. And I'll hand it to you, Sandy, to talk about this.
Sure. Sorry, I was answering questions in the chat, which all great. So what we're kind of witnessing here is this shift, this transition from what I would kind of call maybe information governance 1.0 to information governance 2.0. So 1.0 was, as Jen said, this observational, where most of the tools, most of the capabilities were about reporting. This is what you have. This is where it is. And then what you did about that was kind of, here you go, Evan, here's your report. Good luck with that. And what you did about that was up to you. And the problem was that didn't really help. What are you supposed to do with that? What, move them one at a time by hand? Beg so-and-so in their department to please delete their data? Not like anyone here has ever done that. Into operational. Again, as AI becomes more and more common in every aspect of our lives, so too in the remediation of data. So what's going to start happening is that the AI is going to take the actions. We'll provide it guardrails, always critical. But there will be circumstances where, on the 17th copy of this document, go ahead and delete it. Or if the copy of this is in this location, which is a public location, and it also exists in the proper, system of record, go ahead and delete it. So that's what we mean by operational, whether you want to call that agentic AI or you just want to call that operational, you just want to call it automated. We are starting to actually take these remediation actions instead of just standing by and observing and wringing our hands. So that is the big difference. And as Jen alluded to a minute ago, what that does is move the pace of activity from having to be necessarily reactive and after the fact, right? I have to do file share cleanup because I have a 25-year-old file system of stuff that's accumulated, and I didn't really have any tools or techniques other than my own hands in the observational mode. Now that we're entering operational mode, I have tools, I have capabilities, software could do it for me automatically. It will be a relatively short window of catching up on that backlog and getting to the point in time as the new file, as the new content is created, it will be immediately assessed for all these different things, which takes us very neatly to the next slide, Jen, which is governance by design. Which, whoops.
What?
Oh, I'm sorry. Am I off by one? Sorry. We'll get to mockuments in action, but basically governance by design of having governance built in, thank you, to the tools, to the use cases, not having to run around our organizations and educate everybody on governance after they've already built all this content in their workflows and their day-to-day jobs. It will become part of the fabric. That is the ultimate goal. Nobody panic. You're not going to lose your job over that, because I keep mentioning guardrails. I keep mentioning structure and strategy. That is what your job becomes, instead of sitting there and onesie twosie, remediating documents. Hopefully that's a welcome change for everybody. Mm-hmm. Okay, now we can go to mockuments in action.
So this is a case study of structured data analysis, but a clever use of mockuments. And I don't know, Sandy, do you want me to take this? Do you want to take this?
Oh, you go ahead.
Yeah. So this is a client. They are very acquisitive. They have over 150 acquired acquisitions, lots of employee records, lots of data. What their challenge was, not knowing or being able to figure out what to keep, what to delete. That institutional knowledge of, all the people that came over with an acquisition, there's not a lot of people now who know what to do with this or where this came from. And they realized that although they had the best of intentions, they were out of compliance with their own data retention policies, because they did not have a way to kind of mine all of the data that they had in these structured environments. So their big challenge was how do we execute on these retention policies in these structured data environments, integrate with new systems of record as they come in, and then maintain and respect the legal holds that are both in their data and then coming in with their acquired data as well. So what they did, they had in their database, in their semi-structured databases, they had the database data. So that was the information stored about the employee. And then they also had files and attachments to that record. So if you think of a workday or something like that, the resume, the notes, the NDAs, the employment agreements, the actual physical documents. So what what we did and how we helped them to help visualize that is almost create an employee dossier. So a single report or a single way to see everything about Sally Smith. And in this case, we're talking about Jeff Roberts. But a single way to be able to see all that, to pull from the different structured systems, to pull in that unstructured data that's tied to those database records in the single pane of glass view so that you can now make decisions and apply proper retention on it. And the way that they handled mockuments was that mockument did become a record. And that was a decision that they made. So it was tied to the applicable record class and the retention rules that it came from, with the caveat that the aggregated data that came belonged to the same record class. So that was a decision that they made. And then they simplified and consolidated a few classes together to make it a little more concise, and then defaulted retention to the longer rule. So that's how they handled not only the existence or creation of mockuments, but how that was tied then back to their record classes. So that was a neat way to see taking and analyzing from multiple structured data repositories.
And I'll add something here, which is this organization, like I'm sure most of yours, had different record classes, different retention rules for whether the person was an employee, a contractor, whether they came over as part of the acquisition or they were let go as part of the acquisition. And so it was imperative to not just pull this data, but to figure out which type of employee the person in question was. And just to make it complicated, they had people who were terminated and rehired. They were contractors first, then they became employees, or vice versa. So you have all this kind of complicated situation. So not only were we kind of analyzing the content coming across to say, oh, this is Jen Nelson, she's, engineer level 6, whatever. We were also having to marry up with other data sources that indicated, oh, Jen Nelson was a contractor, or Jen Nelson was never hired. She was considered, this is her resume, but she was never hired at all. So the retention rules were completely different for all of those situations. And in some cases, wherever we could, particularly if the entire bucket related to Jen Nelson was past retention, we could either delete data or delete it and kind of replace it with a mockument. So we would take, the 6 documents related to the Jen Nelson we never hired, delete those, and in their place, put a mockument and say, Jen Nelson was never hired, things were deleted because of X. So you can see now the interplay between the mockument and the analysis of the structured data, 2 different systems, one about, kind of storage of files related to Jen, and one structured data about her non-hire.
Good. Now we're wrapping up, so we've got about 10 minutes left for questions or for conversation. But so challenges and considerations, kind of tying in AI, auto classification, and applying that across structured systems. Certainly, it does come with challenges, but we know that AI is only as effective as the data that it's trained on and processing. So starting with that in structured and also unstructured, of course, data, the data quality for that is key. Integration complexity, so that's integration with the legacy systems, can be challenging, and that's why it's nice to have that kind of auto classification layer to be able to look into and peer into and analyze those multiple siloed repositories. And then, of course, a regulatory compliance. So having a solution that has an eye towards that regulatory compliance, making sure that you're on side with data privacy laws and GDPR and HIPAA and all that is key in implementing something like that. And let's wrap it with our key takeaways. It's not very often we have a key takeaway slide. So certainly auto classification, addressing challenges in manning, of course, structured, and unstructured data. I hope that we had shown you different ways to kind of interpret and to analyze and pull that data out from those different systems. and certainly ways to improve efficiency and transparency. And I will also offer, if you would like a demonstration of kind of what that could look like in your environment with structured data, semi-structured, and of course, unstructured data, we would love to have book some time with you to go through what your specific use case and your challenges in all of your data environments, and what we might do to help. And I will put up this last slide here with our contact information on it. So again, we will send you the slides. We will send you a copy or a link to this webinar recording. But if you do have any comments or any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us directly. Those are our emails up on the screen there. I invite you to go. Yeah, well, wrap it at that. And again, thank you so much for attending this afternoon, and we will see you next time.